Hello, my name is Ari Kotler, the host of Different on SleepyHollowRadio.com. During my show, I will introduce you to incredible people who have overcome profound challenges to become successful. In this episode, my guest is the talented Miss Ruth Harrigan. Miss Harrigan is a quadriplegic digital artist who creates art with a head tracker. Her disability led her to discover how to paint and draw with technology. She enjoys creating abstractions and exploring various brush techniques and styles. She sells her original art in many forms of print, which has appeared in magazines and shows. She is also a music composer, creating artistic works such as Talkbox Concerto, which I find to be an exceptional and experimental piece. She promotes the differently abled community through her Twitter profile, sharing news about problems people like us face and how we can help. Miss Harrigan, welcome. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on my show.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you too. I'm going to start this interview by telling my listeners that you are a person who truly embodies what it means to be flexible, adaptive, and most well adjusted. I understand that you grew up in a conservative middle-class Catholic household, and that you were the first member of your family to earn a doctorate degree. Did your family encourage you, or did you make the decision to achieve an advanced degree on your own?
It was really a decision I made on my own. It was definitely not something my father wanted as a conservative Catholic. He felt that, and this was many years ago, of course, but he felt that women should only get so much education. So we were in those times. And which in my generation, I guess you could refer to as the dark times.
Yeah.
But, we were raised and socialized to grow up and maybe get college to find somebody to marry and start a family, rather than be as career oriented. And certainly, when I broke the news that I was going to go to law school, it was met with dismay, and concern. To which I replied, "This is what I'm doing."
Oh boy.
And I was emancipated at that point. I had moved out to Michigan, and I worked for 2 years to save up for law school after I graduated college. And I had my mind made up. I had a plan.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds like a pretty interesting upbringing, to be honest. I don't think I would do well in that kind of upbringing, but it seems like you came off pretty fine from that. On one website, I read that you said, everyone was shocked that I was a girl. Can you talk about that and how being female was almost considered a disability, and how you overcame this to have a successful legal career?
Yeah, basically, I think a lot of that was the Catholic background, because I went to Catholic grade school. And there were constant, subtle and not so subtle things about how if you were smart and you were a girl, the nuns would say that's such a waste that a girl is that smart. And I just was the type of kid who pushed back at that. I didn't necessarily argue. I just kind of kept trying to do things. And so it didn't really, bother me. But it was really kind of, it did have an effect on my confidence level. It certainly doesn't help to hear that. And then when I went to go to high school, I chose a public high school.
Right.
For obvious reasons. And it was still kind of an issue at home. Like when I would try to join things, my parents would say, well, can't you stay home and babysit? But fortunately, I just kind of would do my own thing. And I went to college when I was very young. I left home around 16 and started college. And I think part of that decision was because I felt restricted by that, background.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm basically thrilled to see how many female attorneys there are now. When I started practicing, I believe I was the first female attorney to have her own office in the county I was in New Jersey. And now I think women outnumber men in the legal field.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy how it just changed like that.
Yeah.
You were such a high achiever and go-getter who had developed a law practice, and then your life changed. Can you talk about your accident and how it changed everything?
Yeah, my accident occurred in my early to mid-30s, and I had pretty much established my practice at that point. I had what they call a bread and butter practice, which is, you do like wills and real estate, things like that. And I did a little estate law and corporate law, but I had worked really hard to get everything going. And then out of the blue, I had the car accident, and my injuries were, unfortunately, were to my spinal cord, and they were not addressed properly at the scene of the accident. In other words, my neck was not stabilized. And so I eventually wound up with more paralysis than I would have had. And it was kind of a tough position to be in because, I had my own practice but no partner in that practice. And I was trying to keep my law practice going with these changed circumstances. And that was quite a challenge to do. And led me to change the type of law I did. Back then, we had the American with Disabilities Act, but it was new. It was fairly new. And I was certainly lucky that it was around, but there were courthouses that were not accessible. And certainly when I did things like real estate closings, other law offices weren't accessible. So it was just a very basic issue of how do I get in the door to do what I'm going to do. And
that is really rough, I gotta say. That is not fun. I'm sorry that I heard you went through that. Can you elaborate on things you suddenly noticed that you never had to? A bit more?
Sure. One of the most obvious things, and it might seem subtle to people who have never been visibly disabled, was the shift in the way I was treated. The first time I went out in public in my wheelchair, I went into a McDonald's, and it was a fairly simple transaction, ordering food, but it was a big deal to me because I was trying. The paralysis affected my arms as well as my legs, and I was trying to figure out how to handle the money and do everything. And I ordered something. I tried to get the money on the counter, and I was fumbling. And the cashier gave me back the wrong change by about $10. And I looked at her and I said, "I think you've made a mistake." And she said, "Oh, honey, can't you do math?" And looked down at me, and I thought, oh boy.
Oh my God.
This is bad. And I think being an attorney, I would go into automatic advocate mode. Even though I was obviously upset. And I asked for the manager, and he came over and looked at me and said, "Well, she's been here a long time and she never makes a mistake, so just, take your food and go eat it and don't make a fuss." And it was just a shock, and almost like a cultural shock, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah. Must be rough. Yeah.
And when I hooked up later on with other people with disabilities and told them about it, they described going through the same thing.
Yeah. Must be a lot of discrimination and stuff happens to people. And it's just like you never notice it until you actually experience it. And it's rough. So, you also mentioned that your clients treated you differently even though your mind was intact. How did they treat you differently?
Unfortunately, that was mostly around money issues back then. They would, quote, forget their checkbook, so they would come in, and I just did not get paid.
Oh, my God.
Which kind of forced me into a corner about what to do, because you obviously can't run a law practice on no money.
Yeah.
I had a few loyal clients, and a few who put me on retainer, which basically meant they would pay me X amount of money for a year and I would handle whatever came up, and that kept me going. But I needed to supplement the work, which is why I began to look around and say, what's some meaningful work I can do here? And I started to work with the Public Advocate's Office.
Okay. That sounds pretty like that took a interesting turn, to say the least.
Yeah.
I'd say that you went to the Public Advocate's Office. Can you explain what a Public Advocate is for our listeners?
Sure. It's the office that represents different branches of the government, including Public Defender's Office and various agencies designed to protect people, often marginalized people.
And so marginalized meaning of race and disability?
Yes, including race and disability.
Right. You mentioned in one interview that you had a sense of ableism prior to your accident. Can you explain this?
I had internal ableism. I had never been visibly disabled, and I had no clue what people with disabilities faced. I had friends who were disabled as before my disability, and I advocated. I had a friend with an intellectual disability I was very close to, and I advocated for her. But that's not the same thing. I mean, that's being an ally, perhaps.
Right.
But no, I just simply was clueless about what it was like.
Like you didn't know, like, until you experienced the disrespect and the just ignorance. I wouldn't say. Would you call it ignorance, or would you call it more of like ableism?
Ableism, and one of my favorite terms with that is microaggressions.
Right, microaggressions.
You know, they're not really all micro, as you know. Some are macroaggressions, but those can kind of eat away at you. And it is one of the ways in which ableism appears, unfortunately, way too frequently.
Yeah, I can see microaggressions are something a lot of people don't realize they do, and it gets pretty serious a lot of times. So, yeah, that's something very important to realize, is that your words can hurt even if you don't mean it, and I totally can see that. And when in your life did you first become interested in arts and music?
I basically was interested in art when I was very young. During my childhood, probably the ages of 3 to 8, and a little beyond that. I had an aunt who was an artist, and I also had a couple of lessons here and there, and I enjoyed it very much. And then music, I basically started playing the guitar when I was in my teens, I would say when I was about 13, and I wrote music on guitar prior to my accident and gave guitar lessons. And I played classical guitar and all kinds of, back then it was like folk music and blues, and I did that, up until the time of the accident.
Yeah, that is, I can see how that would put you into art and music. That is pretty... Would you say your entrance into art and music was forced, or would you say that it was you willingly did it?
It was very, very much my idea.
Right.
Yeah.
But do you think you would have gotten interested in arts and music had it not been for your accident?
I think I would have, yes, I think so. I think that the accident delayed finding ways to do music, certainly, and to do art. The interesting thing was I do everything with a head tracker.
Yeah.
Which is a device that attaches to the top of my computer screen, and you basically wear a dot that connects with the camera, and move your head to move the cursor, and then you have switches for like left and right click and things like that. And until I got that, I really wasn't able to do much with music, even though you can compose on computer, because it's just so detailed to put in like MIDI notes and all those things.
Right.
So I
It
had
is.
planned when I got the head tracker to do music, but there was this painting app that came up, and I was literally fooling around with it. I never intended to get serious about painting. And to my amazement, it worked very well. And the more I played around with it, the more I realized that I was actually painting with the head tracker. And
Right.
so it was one of those just surprises in life.
Just a surprise. Yeah. I can
Yeah.
see. Head trackers are really fun to play if I really wanted one so bad. Just because, like, you can also use it for gaming, it would also be fun. But
Yes.
do you
Definitely.
think that since it's connected to your head, it's an honest form of art, like one of the most honest forms of art?
I think it's authentic in the sense that I am creating it independently. Some people hear digital art and they think artificial intelligence, or they'll say to me, "What app do you use?" And I literally just use the app to get at the brushes and the paint. It's just a conduit to do that. But it's amazing how digital art is misunderstood in the sense of
Yeah.
the kind of art that I'm doing, which is oil painting and abstract art. It's the same as doing it with a paintbrush,
Right.
except with this equipment.
Yeah, I agree. It is pretty much painting, I'd say.
It is.
Except,
And it's interesting is how little it's been explored. There are a lot of mouth painters. I've met other quadriplegics who do mouth painting.
right. Yep.
But not too many who are using this technology.
Yeah, I can see why. Is it, like, hard to use at all? Like, is it, like, glitchy, or does it, like, have mistakes ever happen?
Sometimes the
Yeah.
camera won't track properly,
Do you have to
and
calibrate it?
you do have to calibrate it. And I also have to, thank God it's digital art, because I can just go back and
Oh, yeah.
undo. Like, say it just goes to the left and gets a little wild, I can undo it.
Yep.
And you can't do that with a canvas.
You can't.
So in that way, it's very different, and it's cheaper. Certainly, you don't have to buy canvas and paint, but you can, you know, definitely kind of correct it and then go back, and that helps. But on the whole, I would say it's pretty accurate.
I would agree. It's pretty accurate, and I think that your art looks like it was actually painted by hand too. You couldn't tell really 100%.
Yeah, I think so. It did in the beginning. If you look at my Instagram site, I left some of the paintings up.
Yeah, we'll share your social links at the end of the meeting. So there is
Okay.
room for promotion here because,
Okay.
I mean, you have to promote people if they want to be on your show too. I mean, that is true.
Right.
Right. You can't just have an interview show focused on showcasing people and just not tell how you can learn more about them at the end. So we're going to go into that at the end.
Okay.
You are also a musician, and I liked Talk Box Concerto in particular. That was one of my favorites. I'm more into YouTube music, so I like YouTube music, so I put it on there and I listened, and was pretty nice. I gotta say, was out there, was like experimental and something I didn't hear, but I was wondering, is that an actual like talk box you used for the song?
Yes.
So
Yes, the
can
talk-
you
the talk
elaborate
box-
on that?
The talk box is actually it's kind of a sample that I started with. I'll start with like an idea, and then I wrote the classical music around that. But TalkBox basically is software that allows you to create sounds like that, and it's commonly used in music.
Yeah, that is a very powerful tool, a talk box. So
Yes. Yeah, and I like doing that. I like starting with some kind
I
of
don't
emotion.
really understand what TalkBox actually is like. Is it like a sampling service, or is it like a Moog synthesizer sort of thing?
Yeah, it's kind of like a the one that I used was a sample,
Right.
but the
Sounded like a person talking. Is that how it's supposed to sound?
right, it's like vocoder, which is in
Right.
the same
Can you make
range
it say
with.
like other, like make it like intelligible words too?
Absolutely.
Right.
You can, you've heard robot voices,
Talk like this.
and yeah, exactly. And it's fun. It kind of goes back to what you're talking about with gaming. It's a lot of fun to take
And just make it say
vocoder
stuff
software
that you
and play with
it
it.
wouldn't normally say. Shock value too.
Yeah.
As
And
a
you can
shock
do
value.
you can do things like change the pitch of your voice, which basically means, up and down, male to female kind of
Right.
sounds. And you can add all kinds of effects to your voice. In my song Haunted Choir, I put a lot of ping pong reverb on there,
Right.
which is basically about a choir that gets haunted by somebody from the electronic music who just comes in and
Yeah.
just changes their sound. They're singing this very conventional choir song, and then the electronic producer comes in, which would be me, and just shoots reverb and all kinds of sound effects at it. And that was meant to be just a fun song. And around Halloween, it got a lot of listens.
Yeah.
Um,
But Spotify listens pay like nothing though. So like, yeah, there's not much money in music these days. How do you manage to balance your music ambitions with your daily life and your art ambitions and law stuff? How do you balance that with the daily expense of living and your physical therapy needs? Because I would believe that is expensive. Like, how do you keep that all in check?
it's just a balance.
Right.
It's just a balance of, and it is good to have balance with things. I wish I had access to this technology and had been able to do some of the art much earlier
Yeah. I would.
because of
I
that.
wish
Yeah.
I really have to find my artistic pursuit. I like art, but nothing I do is exceptional. So it's very hard to find something you really like to make too, I have to say. And you mentioned during the height of the pandemic you listened to more concerts than ever before. Since you could listen to them virtually. Can you address how the pandemic brought more performance opportunities?
In terms of going to things, everybody was in the same boat suddenly overnight.
Right.
So
Everyone was inside and everyone was joking about it, and
Yeah.
we thought,
Yeah.
oh, 2 weeks, you'll be out in we'll be out in 2 weeks. Oh, and now my
Yeah.
laptop fan went off. You'll be out in 2 weeks and everything will be right. Continue if you like.
Right, and meanwhile the months are going by, and suddenly all these events that were canceled were being scheduled online, and people
Yeah.
were like, well, I need the money, so I need to put this online somehow, and all of the arrangements for putting things online suddenly became popular and
Right.
cost effective. So all those barriers, like if I want to go to a concert, I have to bring somebody with me because of my disability, which
Right.
means I have to buy them a ticket and
Out of your own pocket.
out of my own pocket, and then I have to pay them. And so it increases the cost of going to things by at least more than doubles it, and so you don't go as frequently. And so basically suddenly something's online and you click a button and you're there. Um,
Right.
it was just phenomenally freeing for me. And the number of events that were available were just
There were a ton,
staggering.
and sadly I never had the time for it. But like, and also for me, what was a big problem for me was the sound was just half the time messed up. But how was your experience finding concerts that had good sound systems and just were you could actually hear or were decent quality?
It was pretty good.
It was
I went
easy
to a
for you?
Excuse me?
Was it easier for you to find stuff that didn't have like connection problems, or was internet access a pain when you were listening to these concerts?
It varied somewhat. And I think the events got better as time went along.
Right. Yeah, I
No, I think
remember
the first
when
few
everyone went
attempts were pretty
online. Oh,
close.
yeah. I remember
Yeah.
when everyone went online and the internet infrastructure was just crazy. Like,
Yeah.
if it happened today, I still don't think we would be able to handle that capacity of data on the internet. There's
Yeah,
just so much. There's not enough redundancy out there to handle all the people online at once.
it's true.
How do you think the art and music communities can be more inclusive and accessible for artists with disabilities?
I think they're starting to do that. I know for disabled musicians, there are groups like RAMPD, RAMPD, which are for professional disabled musicians and composers, and they are working with, um,
Yeah.
actively working to promote their members and get them uh, gigs and jobs and visibility, and that's the disability community helping itself and helping each other, which we're really good at. And then I think that, in all fairness, there's more uh, receptivity by these
Right.
groups to hiring disabled folks. Um, what I feel needs to happen, and is starting to happen, is that treating somebody with a disability, quote, the same as everyone else, is not necessarily going to work.
Right.
And when you get to the employment area, it gets very hard, particularly in our country, the United States. We're pretty much a pull yourself up by your bootstrap kind of folks.
Yes.
And if you go to a job interview and say, I need this accommodation or that accommodation, it's like, bye, see you later. I have friends who've had interviews set up at non-accessible locations when they're in wheelchairs, for example. We just have a long way to go in employment to get to where we need to be to hire disabled people who are really good at what they do. And one of those things is to allow people with disabilities to say what they need in order to be effective at their job.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think people are starting to now talk about. It's one thing to say, okay, remote work has opened up more people with disabilities have jobs. But what about these more nebulous and gray areas, such as how does your disability affect how you get the work done? How are you going to get those accommodations? Who's going to pay for that? Because with a lot of these gig jobs, with these gig jobs, you pay for your own stuff. The employer doesn't pay for that. And then there are things like time extensions, if you need that, which is difficult to talk about, particularly if you're applying for a job. But it is also necessary to be honest about, when you can get things done. Some things you'll get done faster. I mean, remarkably, I will get some work done faster than able-bodied colleagues because of the technology I'm using.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case. So in order for an employer to use the pool of disabled talent properly, there needs to be some education about the needs of the potential employee. And you and I both know that the word disability covers a lot. It's not as simple as just saying, people commonly think of somebody in a wheelchair.
Yes.
That's not what this is about. We're talking about
all
kinds of disabilities.
Everything, helping people that need it. And yeah, I can see how you see that. How do you help people? How do you help people find out more and through engagement on Twitter?
I basically try to put a lot of information out. I do a lot of research, and I try to vary the information a lot, because there's just so much work to be done with advocacy, and there's so many areas, and this gets a little complicated because we're not just talking the United States, we're talking globally. Our disability community is the world, and there are things going on in other countries that we may not know anything about, that, like Ukraine, people with disabilities in Ukraine, when all the war is going on, they need help. And there, but, for the grace of God go we.
Right.
There are organizations that have formed over in Ukraine to help. And then there are places like the Partnership for Strategies, Inclusive Strategies, that are working with those organizations. And I try to spread the word for that.
Spreading the word is very important to help get messages across.
Yes, and also there's countries like the UK where they've had austerity measures, which have greatly affected services and the income of disabled people.
How do you think the public perception of quadriplegia and disability has changed over the years, and what do you hope to see in the future?
I think it's changed for the better, slowly. I think that thanks to our own efforts as a community, a lot of people doing social media and putting up videos and information, I do think that it has humanized the face of spinal cord injury a lot more. What I would like to see, though, is to see people who achieve in ways that may not be as splashy acknowledged. For example, you have, wheelchair athletes are amazing, and I played quadriplegic wheelchair tennis for many years, and there's amazing athletes. But I got more attention for that than for practicing law as a quadriplegic, which was interesting. And I think that as we move forward, what I would like to see is have this evolve into opportunities for more housing, more employment, better ways for people to, when they get some kind of disability, to live in a manageable, affordable fashion. It's a rough road, as it is, and it's expensive, and a lot of people fall through the cracks and are not able to do the things they want to do. They can't afford the technology. They're living in places that are not accessible, which makes them more dependent. And I see it every day in spinal cord forums.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart.
That's really, sad.
Yeah, there were wonderful people there with great potential. But these issues have to be brought out into the light of day and addressed.
Yeah, it's very intense, very important stuff to focus on. Where can people see and buy your work?
My website is Head Tracker Art, one word, on Redbubble. And I have a lot of fun stuff there. And then I have a fine art store, which is Ruth, RUTH Harrigan, HARRIGAN .pixels.com.
Yeah.
And I also have, I have the Twitter account and Instagram account, and I have links to everything on those accounts. The other thing I've started doing is putting up art music videos on YouTube.
Oh, AMVs?
Yeah, on shorts.
Yeah, that's fun.
And those are fun. Yeah, those are a lot of fun.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about your life experiences?
I think I would just like to say that for those who are listening, if they can just take a moment and look at some of the disability community social media online, some of the information that's out there, it's really helpful to those of us with disabilities for people to do that.
Yeah.
And Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on my show. You were an engaging guest and generous to take time out of your busy. Sorry. You were such an engaging guest and generous to take time out of your busy schedule to be here today. You are a role model for many people, and I hope to stay in touch. Information about Miss Harrigan or Dr. Harrigan is available on her Twitter profile at Ramp Racer. Also, check out her link tree at linktr.ee/RUTHHARRIGAN. Remember to follow me on Twitter at DifferentAK, and for updates on my show, reach out to me. For a portal of information on my show, go to linktr.ee/DifferentAK. Ms. Harrigan, do you have any last words for our listeners?
It was a pleasure being here and being on this show. Thank you, Ari.
Thank you. This was very amazing talk, and you are listening to SleepyHollowRadio.com. Now, here is Talkbox Concerto by Ruth Harrigan.